glad tidings from angels, a song from Mary about the redemption that Christ brings. All along we've been amazed at a God who has sent us a Savior to change everything, to bring us forgiveness, new life, to show us the way of Christ, how we're to live out our faith. We've heard John the Baptist cry out in the wilderness. We've witnessed the Spirit descend like a dove upon Jesus with a voice from heaven, "This is my Son, chosen and marked by my love, pride of my life." The same Spirit that drove Jesus into the wilderness, a barren place where one cannot hide from themselves, a place where one is tempted, must examine his priorities, must decide who he's going to serve, and yet our Lord does not disappoint us, shows us what it means to be Son of God, and then heads home to deliver a prophetic word of good news to the poor, which we had last week. Good news to the poor, release and recovery and healing, to set the burdened and battered free. Because this is God's year to act. And Jesus is the Jubilee. And that brings us to this morning's lesson. Let us see how Jesus' hometown reacts to his first sermon.
This comes from Luke, chapter 4, verse 21 through 30. He rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the assistant, and sat down. Every eye in the place was on him, intent. He then started in. You just heard Scripture make history. It came true just now in this place. And all who were there were watching and listening, and were surprised at how well he spoke. They also said, "Isn't this Joseph's son, the one we've known since he was a youngster?" He answered, "I suppose you're going to quote the proverb, 'Doctor, go heal yourself.' Do here in your hometown what we heard you did in Capernaum." But let me tell you something. No prophet is ever welcomed in his hometown. Isn't it a fact that there were many widows in Israel, and at the time of Elijah, during the 3.5 years of drought, when famine devastated the land, but the only widow to whom Elijah was sent was in Sarepta in Sidon. He did this on purpose, you know. And then there were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elijah. I like that. But the only one cleansed was Naaman of Syria. That set everyone in the meeting place seething with anger. They threw him out, banished him from the village, then took him to the mountain that at the edge of the village was throwing to his doom. But he gave him the slip, and he was on his way. This is the word of God.
God is so speaking, thanks be to God.
O God of wondrous love, O God who pushes us to see the depth of that love, come to us this day and let that love be made manifest in us. Even when it is hard, let us love. Bless the speaking, the hearing, and the living of your holy word. Amen. So this week, Jan and I went to go see The Green Book. And enjoyed that. A picture into the past. Not probably our best past, but our past nonetheless. The Green Book, for those who don't know, was a guidebook. It was for blacks, that when they traveled in the South, they could find the hotels or the restaurants where they could be served, because in many places they could not. The Green Book sets up an interesting story, though. First you have this black musician, and this man is educated, sophisticated, and wealthy. He's in New York. He lives above Carnegie Hall. He's an expert musician. But he feels the need to go and travel in the South. Not to make money, but really to bring something of a mission down there, to bring his music down there as a black man. And he needs a driver to take him down there, and he hires a white guy, an Italian man, who's known as Tony Lip. And they call him Tony Lip because he's good at talking bull. So I'll give the G-rated version. So, but he's from a poor working Italian neighborhood. He worries about next month's rent. And at the beginning of the story, Tony had hired some people to clean their kitchen because it got moldy or something, and they sent over 2 black folks. And Tony, after they got done, his wife gave him 2 glasses of water to thank them. Well, after they left, Tony went in and saw those glasses in the sink, and he carefully picked them up, opened the trash can, and put them in there. Tony was a bit prejudiced. You could say it was the times. And so it's ironic that he then gets hired by this man. And, Tony doesn't really change who Tony is. But, he's rough, he's uncouth. But still, he has a kind of integrity about him. That he keeps his word. So the movie is great as these 2 journey together. And though at first Tony may have this view, towards the end, you can tell that they have become good friends. And Tony even invites the man to his home on Christmas Eve. I bring up that story because, segregation, prejudice, bigotry, there was a time, and even there's a time today, that it is hard to love those that are different. We get comfortable with who we are and who we tend to be around, and crossing boundaries is tough. But Jesus did that all the time. And his sermon, after he talked to his hometown, he made them understand that he was called to reach out across boundaries to people even that you may not like. I added that story so I have to find my notes again. The truth, my friends, is that it's sometimes hard to love. For whatever reason, whether our own fears or prejudices, whether our own upbringing, if you want to use that excuse, even our past hurts and grievances, that we realize there are times when it is hard for us to love. It's difficult to love certain people or people that have hurt us. Now, let's go back to the story and see what Jesus is doing and what's been happening. First of all, Jesus is in his hometown. These people remember Jesus when he was just a kid, laughing, carrying on, running around, doing all those things little kids do, and how they can laugh at the weirdest things. And they knew his parents too, and now this boy has grown up into a fine man, a great speaker who knows his Torah. But wait, what did he just say? Did he just say the scripture passage just came true? Now, let's don't get presumptuous here, boy. It's one thing to have a fine sermon, but to have the audacity to say that God's doing it through you. But what really gets them riled up is when Jesus starts saying he's not going to help them. He's got the scripture to back him up, but those aren't the verses the people in this hometown want him to quote. Funny how folks only want to read verses of scripture that justify their own living and benefit them instead of the ones that challenge us to see the scope of God's love. They get mad. They get mad because Jesus is telling them that not only is he not going to help them specifically, but that his healing is for the outsiders, for the Gentiles, for the Samaritans, even the Romans, for all those people that you don't like, all those people that you can't stand, that perhaps you even hate. Now, more than that, you have to think about the culture, the Jewish culture. Jews had been taught to keep themselves ate certain foods. They had their own customs, their own ways of doing things. They only married other Jews. And even socially, they kept to themselves. They did not mix with others. Not only was that dangerous, but in several places in the Bible, God tells the Hebrew people not to mix. Don't do it. It's wrong. Now, we don't have to be Jewish to understand such embedded prejudice. Even today, we know the challenges of living in a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious world. We just got over a government shutdown over border security and the building of a wall, all meant to keep people out. Our own country does not have the proudest history, as I talked about earlier with the Green Book, when it comes to our treatment of folks who are not white. And not only the African Americans, Native Americans, Asians, blacks and browns of every flavor. If we are to realize anything today, it's that all of us carry some inherent prejudice, whether we realize it or not. And instead of facing up to them, we sometimes hide behind Scripture to justify our fear. In a lot of ways, this story is about showing hospitality to strangers, about showing kindness to others, about sharing the gospel with a needy world. The truth is that sometimes it's difficult to show love to others. It's hard to accept the stranger, even harder to step out of our familiar environment and embrace those who are different from us. We all know that there are many different kinds of barriers that we place in front of ourselves. We human beings are very good at dividing ourselves. And there are many ways that we marginalize others. But we also know that kind of division is not the way of Christ. If anything, God asks us to go outside our familiar boundaries and embrace each other with love. To find that God often works in the margin, in the least of these, in even those that we have contempt upon. Our own actions must proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, because we are all worthy of God's love. I think many of you recall that Jackie Robinson was the first black man ever to play Major League Baseball. In his first season with the Brooklyn Dodgers, Robinson faced venom nearly everywhere he traveled. Pitchers threw fastballs at his head, runners would spike him on the bases. Brutal things were written on cards, spoken to him from the opposing dugouts. Even home crowds in Brooklyn saw him an object of reproach. During one game in Boston, the taunts and racial slurs grew to an alarming level. Their sound filled the entire stadium. And to make matters worse, Robinson had committed an error and stood at second base humiliated, while fans hurled insults at him. Another Dodger a southern white man named Pee Wee Reese, called timeout. And he walked over from his position at shortstop over to Robinson at second base. And with the gaze of everyone at that stadium, he put his arm around Robinson and stood there for a moment. The fans all grew quiet. A new wave of peace settled in the air. People realized their prejudice. Robinson later said that that arm around his shoulder saved his career. There are so many ways we divide ourselves. White and black. Heck, white and any person of color. Whether they be Hispanic, Asian, or something else. We divide ourselves into Catholics and Protestants, into believers and nuns, into Christians and Jews and Muslims. In some cases, the hatred between two people date back centuries. And they don't seem to be able to find any kind of reconciliation. But the divisions are not only on racial or ethnic lines. We divide ourselves by social class, whether we are rich or poor, blue collar or white collar, young or old, liberal or conservative. and let them divide us. My friends, when Jesus Christ walked into that synagogue, all eyes were fixed on him. He took that scroll of Israel, he read it, he proclaimed that it had been fulfilled in their presence. He spoke with elegance, he spoke with the power of God. Everybody was amazed and moved by his words. But then he dropped the bomb on them. They heard what he had been doing. They heard about his teaching. More importantly, they heard about his miracles, how he had been healing people. He could heal the sick. And here he was proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. Surely, they thought, he would free them from the tyranny of the Romans. He would bring the Hebrew people finally, once again, peace. And they would once again be like in the days of David and Solomon and rule the world, a new age for the Jewish people. But that's not what he did, was it? That's not the kind of salvation that Jesus brought to his people. And here in his hometown, he might have gotten their hopes up at the beginning, but then he frankly told them that they were not the only recipient of God's grace. Oh, they heard the message of redemption from God, but the good news was for all people. And there were others, outsiders even, who really needed that salvation as well. Jesus talked to them about prophets, Elijah, Elisha, both of these prophets, even in the great time of distress among the Hebrews, were sent to give comfort, not to any Jewish or Hebrew person, but to a foreigner, an outsider. Elijah went to Sidon, where Elisha went to Syria. Now, if you don't think that was radical for those prophets, just think about the ongoing, never-ending conflict within the Middle East today that has been going on for centuries. That hate, that distrust, it has gone for even a millennium or more. It's hard to think of the other side as being loved by God. Maybe then you can understand the response that Jesus received. According to the people who were gathered there in the synagogue, they weren't getting any kind of good news. Jesus was telling them that they weren't going to get any healings from him. He was going to go elsewhere. And the message of salvation was for all. For their upcoming trip to the border and some of our own views on injustice in our immigration policy, it might be easy for us to hear this sermon and think, well, how good we are, for being so inclusive. Here we are, an open and affirming church. If so, my friends, you have missed the point. And you are possibly blind to your own prejudice and sin. I have it. We all have it. All of us have shortcomings. If Jesus was with a bunch of liberals, he'd be reminding them that God loves all those Trump supporters with their Make America Great Again hats. And he would expect them to be treated with love and respect and dignity. He'd tell Native Americans to love the European invader and the former slave to love his former master. What Jesus is saying is difficult for all of us. Because the truth is sometimes it's just plain hard to love. And maybe we're not prejudiced in that sense, but all of us have been hurt by someone, damaged by someone. It's hard enough to forgive and to show love to someone who has hurt us. But we know what God wants. We know what the Lord requires of us. God does not see lines on a map or division the way that we do. God sees only her children, and if any are hurting, God wants to help them. There's a quote from John Calvin, and if you switch the screen, I'll have it on the screen there. Every person bears the divine image, and so when anyone is injured, the heart of God is wounded. Every person bears the divine image. And so when anyone is injured, the heart of God is wounded. Even when love is hard, we need to show it. We need to press for a world that offers compassion and hospitality, especially to those who are different than us. Sometimes there are people who just rub us the wrong way, maybe even push our buttons. I pray that we can find the grace to meet life with patience and love and do our best to see life through the eyes of Christ. Though God's will for justice may make us uncomfortable at times, and even the good news of Jesus can mean the giving up of power and control, we must let the Lord rule in our hearts and open us up to love, even when it is hard. Thanks be to God.